My name is Molly, and I just turned 32. After years of hard work saving every penny and countless sacrifices, I finally bought my first house last month. A modest two-bedroom place in suburban Chicago. But it was mine, all mine. I was unpacking boxes when my phone rang. It was my mother calling to congratulate me, or so I thought. What she actually wanted shocked me to my core. I couldn't believe what my family expected of me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit the like and subscribe buttons, and get ready for a wild family drama that changed my life forever. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a family where money was always tight, but love was supposedly abundant. At least that was what my parents claimed. In reality, that abundance of love seemed to flow more freely toward my younger sister Jessica than it ever did toward me. 4 years younger than me, Jessica was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. While I had to work for everything I got, Jessica had things handed to her on a silver platter. From as early as I can remember, there was always a distinct difference in how we were treated. When I wanted new shoes for school, I was told we couldn't afford them. But somehow, there was always money for Jessica's dance classes or the expensive clothes she just had to have. My parents explained it away, saying Jessica was more sensitive and needed the extra support. But even as a child, I knew something wasn't right about the situation. By 16, I was working after school at a local grocery store, saving up for college because I knew my parents wouldn't be able to help much. Or maybe they could have, but those funds were earmarked for Jessica. I worked 20 hours a week while maintaining honor roll grades, often staying up until midnight to finish homework after my shifts. My parents barely acknowledged my efforts, acting as if this was the expected path for me, while Jessica was allowed to focus solely on being a teenager. After high school, I got into several good colleges, but chose the one offering the best scholarship package. Even with that financial aid, I still graduated with $40,000 in student loan debt. I majored in graphic design, following my passion for art and digital media, despite my father's insistence that it wasn't a real career path. During those 4 years, I worked part-time jobs, lived in tiny apartments with multiple roommates, and ate more ramen noodles than I care to remember. Meanwhile, Jessica barely made it through high school, with my parents constantly making excuses for her mediocre grades. College wasn't even a serious consideration for her. While I was struggling through my junior year, pulling all-nighters to finish design projects, Jessica was living at home, working part-time at a mall boutique, and spending her evenings partying with friends. My parents never pushed her to strive for more. After graduation, I moved to Chicago for an entry-level position at a small design firm. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and my student loan payments, but it was a foot in the door of the industry. Those first few years were incredibly difficult. I lived in a shoebox studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, took public transportation everywhere, and continued the ramen noodle diet far longer than my taste buds appreciated. But I persevered. I put in extra hours, took on freelance projects on weekends, and slowly built my portfolio and reputation. After 3 years, I landed a better position at a well-known design agency, which came with a significant pay raise. For the first time in my life, I could breathe a little financially. I started paying down my student loans more aggressively, and even began setting aside a small amount each month for a future down payment on a home. The next 7 years were a grind, but a productive one. I climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a senior designer with a team under my direction. I lived below my means, resisting the urge to upgrade my lifestyle significantly when promotions came. Instead, I funneled that extra money into my house fund. While colleagues jetted off to tropical vacations, I took staycations or affordable road trips. When they bought new cars, I kept my reliable but unglamorous sedan running. Every financial decision I made was with one goal in mind: owning my own home. It took 5 years of dedicated saving, but finally, at 32, I had enough for a down payment on a modest house in a nice suburban neighborhood outside Chicago. It wasn't fancy, just a 2-bedroom, 1.5-bathroom ranch-style home built in the 70s. But it had good bones, a small backyard, and most importantly, it was mine. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty living room and cried. Happy tears. Tears of accomplishment and pride. No one had helped me get here. Every dollar of the down payment had come from my own hard work and sacrifices. I had plans for every inch of that house. The second bedroom would be my home office, allowing me to take on more freelance work and possibly transition to full-time remote work eventually. The small backyard would become my little garden oasis with a patio where I could have morning coffee. The living room would finally hold the comfortable furniture I'd been dreaming of buying once I had a permanent place to put it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had created a stable, comfortable life for myself through sheer determination and grit. This house represented not just a financial investment, but an investment in my independence and future. It was my sanctuary, my achievement, my reward for years of hard work. Little did I know that my family had very different ideas about what my new home should mean to them. To understand why what happened next hit me so hard, you need to know a bit more about my sister Jessica. While I was working multiple jobs and putting myself through college, Jessica was living a very different kind of life. Jessica is 4 years younger than me, putting her at 28 now. She was always the pretty one, with her honey blonde hair and big blue eyes that could charm anyone, especially our parents. Growing up, she never had to work for anything. Good grades, not necessary. Chores, optional at best. Respect for others, property, a foreign concept. If Jessica wanted something, she either batted those eyes or threw a tantrum until she got it. And it always worked. Our parents excused her behavior at every turn. When she stole $50 from my graduation money to buy a new outfit, my mother said I should be more careful where I keep my things. When she borrowed my car without permission and got a parking ticket, my father paid it and told me not to be so selfish with my possessions. Every lesson that should have taught Jessica about consequences and responsibility was instead turned into a lesson for me about generosity and family loyalty. After high school, while I was working my way through college, Jessica bounced between retail jobs, never staying at one place longer than a few months. Sometimes she quit because the work was too boring. Other times she was fired for chronic tardiness or calling in sick too often. None of this seemed to concern our parents, who continued to support her financially and emotionally. At 22, Jessica met Tom. He was 26, worked as a sales representative for a medical supply company, and drove a fancy car he could barely afford. Their relationship moved at lightning speed, and within 6 months, they were engaged. My parents were thrilled seeing Tom as Jessica's ticket to stability. I had my doubts from the beginning. Tom seemed nice enough, but he and Jessica shared an alarming tendency toward financial impulsiveness. They had a lavish wedding that my parents paid for despite their supposedly tight finances. Jessica wore a designer gown that cost more than a semester of my college tuition. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Bali, also funded by our increasingly indebted parents. I served as maid of honor, smiling through the entire extravaganza, while silently calculating how many extra shifts I would need to work to cover my portion of the student loans my parents had originally promised to help with before Jessica's wedding consumed their savings. After the wedding, Tom and Jessica bought a house. Not a starter home like mine, but a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom mini mansion in a prestigious neighborhood. I remember visiting them shortly after they moved in, bringing a houseplant as a gift because it was all I could afford. Jessica gave me the grand tour, pointing out all the high-end appliances and custom features they had selected. When I asked how they could afford it all on Tom's salary and her part-time retail position, she waved away my concern. Tom was expecting a big promotion, she said. They were fine. They weren't fine. The promotion never materialized, and their mortgage payments were astronomical. Jessica got pregnant with their first child, Amy, less than a year after the wedding. She quit her job, insisting that she needed to focus on preparing for the baby. With only one income and mounting debt, they started missing mortgage payments. Rather than downsizing or making other practical financial adjustments, they doubled down. Tom leased an even more expensive car, claiming he needed to look successful to impress clients. Jessica decorated the nursery with top-of-the-line furniture and designer baby clothes. When Amy was born, they hired a part-time nanny, even though Jessica was a stay-at-home mom. Their financial house of cards was teetering, but they kept adding more cards. Lucas came along 2 years after Amy. Now, with 2 young children, their expenses increased while their financial sense did not improve. Jessica would call me occasionally, complaining about bill collectors harassing them or unexpected expenses putting them in a bind. These conversations always seemed to end with hints about how well I was doing in my career and how family should help family. I sent what I could, usually a few $100s here and there, though it strained my own budget and delayed my house-saving goals. 6 months ago, the inevitable happened. Tom lost his job. The medical supply company was restructuring, and his position was eliminated. Instead of immediately looking for comparable work, Tom decided he deserved a break, a chance to reassess his career goals. That break stretched from days into weeks, then months. When he finally started job hunting, he found that his 6-year employment gap and lack of additional skills or education made him less competitive in the job market. He eventually took a part-time position at an electronics store, making less than half his previous salary. Meanwhile, Jessica remained unemployed. Despite the financial crisis, she insisted that finding childcare would cost more than she'd make working, so there was no point. She had no marketable skills beyond retail, and even those were rusty after years of not working. Their financial situation deteriorated rapidly. 3 months ago, they lost the house. The bank foreclosed after they fell behind on payments for almost a year. With nowhere else to go, they moved in with our parents, cramming into the small 3-bedroom house where we grew up. My parents turned their home office back into a bedroom for Amy and Lucas, while Jessica and Tom took over my old room. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until they got back on their feet. But with Tom working minimal hours, Jessica not working at all, and no real plan for the future, temporary was looking increasingly permanent. My parents' house was chaotic and crowded. Amy and Lucas, while adorable in small doses, were energetic, loud, and accustomed to getting their way just like their mother had been. My father, now in his 60s, was still working full-time, coming home to a house where he couldn't find a moment of peace. My mother was essentially raising her grandchildren, while Jessica spent her days scrolling on her phone or complaining about their situation without taking any steps to improve it. Throughout all of this, I maintained my focus on my goals. I visited for Sunday dinners when I could listen sympathetically to my mother's complaints about the cramped living situation, and occasionally took Amy and Lucas for an afternoon to give everyone a break. I sent gifts for birthdays and Christmas, even when it meant tightening my own budget. I tried to be supportive while still maintaining the boundaries necessary for my own financial and emotional health. What I didn't realize was that in my family's eyes, my support was insufficient. My boundaries were seen as selfish, and my new house, the one I had worked so hard for and sacrificed so much to obtain, was viewed not as my achievement and sanctuary, but as the solution to their problems. A solution that required no effort or change on their part, only my capitulation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would fundamentally alter our family dynamic forever. It was a Saturday morning, just 2 weeks after I had moved into my new house. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, enjoying a cup of coffee and making lists of all the small projects I wanted to tackle that weekend. The sunshine streamed through the windows, creating patterns on the hardwood floors I had fallen in love with when first viewing the property. In that moment, I felt a contentment I had rarely experienced before, a sense of being exactly where I was meant to be. My phone rang, displaying my mother's name on the screen. I answered with a cheerful hello, expecting perhaps an invitation to Sunday dinner, or just to check in to see how the unpacking was going. "Good morning, Molly," my mother said, her voice carrying that forced brightness she used when she wanted something. "How are you settling in?" "Great, Mom," I replied, taking another sip of my coffee. "I'm just making some plans for organizing the spare bedroom today. I want to set up my desk and get the office functional so I can start taking some additional freelance work." "Oh, that's nice, dear." She paused, and I could almost hear her gathering her thoughts for whatever was really on her mind. The congratulatory pleasantries were clearly just a preamble. "So, your father and I were talking, and we think we've come up with a wonderful solution for everyone." My stomach tightened instinctively. In my experience, my parents' wonderful solutions rarely turned out to be wonderful for me. "What kind of solution?" I asked cautiously. "Well," she began, her voice taking on that sugary quality that always preceded an unreasonable request. "Jessica and Tom are really struggling right now, as you know. The kids are having such a hard time adjusting to living with us. Amy keeps asking when they'll have their own house again, and Lucas had a meltdown yesterday because he doesn't have enough space for his toys." I made a non-committal sound of sympathy, already sensing where this was heading, but hoping desperately that I was wrong. "And it's so crowded here," my mother continued. "Your father can barely get any rest after work with the kids running around. And Tom is really trying to find better employment, but it's difficult in this economy." Again, I murmured something vaguely empathetic, waiting for her to get to the point. "So we were thinking—" Her voice brightened even more artificially. "Sweet now. You have that beautiful new house with 2 bedrooms and you're just one person. Jessica and Tom and the kids could move in with you for a little while just until they get back on their feet. You only need 1 bedroom after all. The second one could easily fit Amy and Lucas, and Jessica and Tom could use your living room. It would be perfect." The coffee I had just sipped seemed to curdle in my stomach. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what my mother was suggesting. No, not suggesting. Expecting. "Mom, I finally managed that wouldn't work. I bought this house specifically because I need the second bedroom as a home office. I can't work from my bedroom." "Oh, sweetie, you could put a small desk in the corner of your bedroom." My mother dismissed my concern with breathtaking casualness. "It's not like you need a whole room just for working, and this would only be temporary. Just a few months until Tom finds something better and they can get their own place again." "A few months," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Mom, there's barely enough space here for me, let alone 2 additional adults and 2 children. And what about my privacy, my routines? This is my house that I worked incredibly hard to afford." "Well, family helps family." "Molly," my mother replied, her voice taking on a harder edge now that she sensed my resistance. "Jessica would do the same for you if the situations were reversed." I nearly laughed at that. Jessica had never done anything for me that involved even the slightest inconvenience to herself. The idea that she would open her home to me if our roles were reversed was so absurd it bordered on delusional. "Mom, I love Jessica and the kids," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "But having 4 additional people move into my small house isn't a realistic solution. It's not just about the physical space. I need quiet to work. I have clients calling at all hours sometimes. I can't have screaming children in the background." "Children make noise, Molly. That's what they do." My mother was clearly getting annoyed now. "You could adjust your schedule, work when they're asleep or at the park. Jessica could take them out during your important calls." The casual way she volunteered my time and space, the presumption that I should completely rearrange my life to accommodate Jessica and her family's poor choices, lit a fire of indignation in my chest. "No, Mom. I'm sorry, but no. This house is too small for 5 people, and frankly, I just moved in. I deserve to enjoy the home I worked so hard for." I paused, then added what I thought was a reasonable compromise. "I can help Jessica and Tom look for an affordable apartment. Maybe I could even help with the security deposit." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, so you're saying you won't help your own sister? After everything this family has done for you? The unfairness of that statement hit me like a physical blow. What exactly had my family done for me? My parents hadn't contributed a dime to my education. They hadn't helped with the down payment on my house. Every milestone in my adult life had been achieved through my own efforts, often while simultaneously being expected to contribute to bailing out Jessica from whatever her latest crisis happened to be. I'm saying I won't turn the home I just purchased into a crowded boarding house, I replied, my patience finally snapping. I'm willing to help in other ways, but Jessica and Tom need to take responsibility for their own lives. They made choices that led to this situation. I'm not going to put my life on hold because they refuse to live within their means or get full-time jobs. I can't believe how selfish you've become. My mother snapped, her pretense of sweetness completely gone now. Your sister has children, Molly. Do you expect your niece and nephew to live in some tiny, dangerous apartment when you've got a perfectly good house with room to spare? My house doesn't have room to spare, I insisted. It's just enough space for me. And there are plenty of safe, affordable apartments that would be appropriate for a family of 4. They just might need to adjust their expectations. You know what my mother said, her voice cold and dismissive. I always knew you were the difficult one, but I never realized just how cold-hearted you've become. When you decide to start acting like a real member of this family, give us a call. Until then, don't bother. The line went dead. My mother had hung up on me. I sat there, phone still in hand, feeling as though I'd been slapped. My hands were shaking, and tears of anger and hurt burned behind my eyes. Within minutes, my phone pinged with a text from my mother. Your father is very disappointed in you too. We raised you better than this. Then another Jessica is crying now. Thanks for ruining her day with your selfishness. I placed my phone face down on the counter and put my head in my hands. The beautiful, peaceful morning had been shattered. My coffee was cold, my list forgotten, and the joy I'd felt in my new home was now tainted with guilt and anger. But beneath those emotions, something else was stirring. A certainty that for perhaps the first time in my life, I needed to stand firm against my family's manipulations, even if it meant being the villain in their story. Over the next week, the pressure from my family intensified to a degree I hadn't thought possible. My father called the evening after my mother's initial phone call, his voice gruff with disapproval. Your mother is very upset, Molly, he said without preamble when I answered. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. When I was your age, I would have done anything to help my siblings. I bit back the urge to point out that when he was my age, houses were significantly more affordable, and he and my mother had already been homeowners for years with plenty of space for their family. Instead, I tried reason once more. Dad, I said carefully, my house is too small for 6 people. It's barely 1,500 square feet total. Where would everyone sleep? Where would I work? Where would the kids play? Families make do, he replied dismissively. During the Depression, people had much larger families and much smaller homes. You're making excuses because you don't want to be inconvenienced. It's not about convenience, I protested. It's about practicality and boundaries. I worked really hard for this house. And Jessica worked really hard raising those children, he countered, as if that was somehow equivalent to the decade of financial sacrifice and career building I'd undertaken. Family comes first, Molly. I thought we taught you that. When he hung up a few minutes later, it was with the same disappointment my mother had expressed. Once again, I was the selfish one for not immediately sacrificing my hard-earned stability for my sister. The next salvo came from Jessica herself. A series of text messages popped up on my phone the following morning as I was getting ready for work. Mom told me what you said. I can't believe you'd leave your own flesh and blood homeless when you have all that extra space. Before I could even formulate a response, another message appeared. The kids were so excited when we told them we might move in with Aunt Molly. Now I have to explain to them that their aunt doesn't love them enough to share her house. The manipulation was so blatant it was almost comical. Jessica had clearly told Amy and Lucas about moving into my house before even discussing it with me. It was a tactic she had used our entire lives, creating expectations in others, and then blaming me when those expectations weren't met. A third message came through as I was about to leave for work. Tom says your second bedroom is bigger than the one we had for the kids at our old house. He measured it when he helped you move that bookshelf last weekend. We wouldn't even need much space in the rest of the house since you'd be at work all day anyway. The casual entitlement of that message sent a chill down my spine. Tom had been measuring my bedrooms during the brief visit when he'd helped me move a single piece of furniture. They had been planning this invasion of my space before I'd even finished unpacking. I decided not to respond to any of Jessica's messages. Engaging would only give her more ammunition to twist my words and paint me as the villain. Instead, I silenced my phone and headed to work, trying to focus on the design project that was due that afternoon, rather than the family drama consuming my personal life. But the pressure campaign didn't stop there. By midweek, I was receiving calls and messages from extended family members. My mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, called to express her concern. I heard about the situation with Jessica. She said, her voice heavy with judgment. I know you've always been the independent one, Molly, but family has to come together in times of need. My cousin Ryan, who I hadn't spoken to in at least 2 years, suddenly felt the need to message me on social media. Hey, 'cause saw your new house on Facebook. Looks nice. Heard Jess and the fam might be moving in with you. That's so generous. You've always been the one with your life together. The message was framed as a compliment, but carried a clear expectation that the arrangement was a done deal. Word had clearly spread throughout the family grapevine, with my refusal being conveniently omitted from the narrative. Even more disturbing were the comments appearing on my social media posts. On a photo I had shared of my new living room, still sparsely furnished, but full of potential, my mother's friend Carol commented, "Such a big space for just one person. Your sister and those precious babies would love it here." Another family friend wrote, "Congratulations on the new house. So kind of you to open it to family in need. That's what homes are, for sharing." These comments, clearly orchestrated by my mother or Jessica, were designed to publicly pressure me into compliance. The subtext was clear: a good person, a good sister, a good daughter would share her home. My refusal branded me as selfish and cold in the court of family opinion. The culmination of this week-long pressure campaign came at Sunday dinner. I had been tempted to skip it to avoid the inevitable confrontation, but that would only have reinforced the narrative that I was in the wrong. So I drove to my parents' house, bringing a dessert as always, and steeled myself for what was to come. The atmosphere was tense from the moment I arrived. Jessica barely acknowledged my presence, ostentatiously comforting Amy, who was supposedly crying earlier because Aunt Molly wouldn't let them live in her house. Tom gave me a cold nod before returning to his football game on TV, as if I were merely an unpleasant interruption to his leisure time rather than the person whose house he had been measuring up for occupation. Dinner itself was a masterclass in passive-aggressive commentary. My mother sighed heavily as she served the meal, lamenting how difficult it was to cook in her small kitchen with so many people in the house. My father commented multiple times on how tired he was, how he couldn't get proper rest with the children up early each morning. Every complaint was delivered with a pointed look in my direction, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. "This is your fault. You could fix this if you weren't so selfish." Halfway through the meal, Tom decided to move from passive to active aggression. "You know, Molly," he said, leaning forward with an expression of forced reasonableness, "I checked out your home office setup last time I was there. That desk would fit perfectly in the corner of your bedroom. I'd even help you move it. Free up that second bedroom in no time." The audacity of his statement, the presumption that he had any say in the arrangement of my home, left me momentarily speechless. Before I could respond, Jessica jumped in. "And the kids are really good at playing quietly when they need to," she added, as if the issue was merely about noise level and not the complete upheaval of my life. We would make sure they don't disturb you when you're working. They're very adaptable. I looked at Amy and Lucas, who at that very moment were arguing loudly over a toy and smearing mashed potatoes on the tablecloth. Jessica's claim was so divorced from reality that I almost laughed. Instead, I took a deep breath and said as calmly as I could, "I've already explained that this arrangement wouldn't work for me. My house is too small for 6 people, and I need my home office for work." "The house is not too small," Tom scoffed. "You just don't want to share." "That's not fair," I replied, feeling my composure slipping. "I've worked incredibly hard for that house. I sacrificed for years to save for the down payment. I deserve to enjoy it. And what about what my children deserve?" Jessica demanded, her voice rising dramatically. "They deserve a stable home, not to be crammed into Mom's sewing room. They need their own space, just like your precious home office." The conversation deteriorated from there, with accusations flying about my selfishness, my lack of family loyalty, my apparent coldness toward my niece and nephew. No one seemed interested in acknowledging that my concerns were valid, that having 4 additional people move into my small house was an unreasonable expectation, or that Jessica and Tom had options they simply refused to consider, because those options required effort and compromise on their part. I left dinner early, the weight of my family's disapproval and manipulation heavy on my shoulders. As I drove home, I called my friend Sarah, the one person who might understand what I was going through. "That's absolutely insane," Sarah said, after I recounted the events of the past week. "They can't seriously expect you to house an entire family in your new place. You just moved in." "Apparently they can and do," I replied, feeling a wave of relief that at least one person didn't think I was being unreasonable. My mother actually suggested I put my desk in the corner of my bedroom so Jessica and Tom could have the second bedroom for their kids. Sarah made a sound of outrage. "And where exactly would Jessica and Tom sleep?" "Your living room. Would you have to ask permission to watch TV in your own house?" "This is ridiculous, Molly. Stand your ground." Hearing Sarah's validation gave me the strength I needed to face the continued pressure from my family. I wasn't being selfish for wanting to maintain the home I'd worked so hard to create. I was simply establishing reasonable boundaries, something my family had never respected or understood. With Sarah's support and my own growing resolve, I prepared for whatever escalation might come next. I didn't have to wait long to find out exactly what form that escalation would take. As the tension with my family continued to build, I decided to try a more proactive approach to resolving the situation. Rather than simply saying no and dealing with the resulting backlash, I would offer concrete alternatives that could actually help Jessica and her family while still maintaining my own boundaries. I spent an evening researching affordable housing options in the area around my parents' house. I found several apartment complexes with 3-bedroom units that were within a reasonable budget, especially if both Jessica and Tom were working full-time. I made a list of these options, including photos, floor plans, and contact information for the property managers. I even went so far as to call a few places to check on availability and application requirements. I also looked into job opportunities for both Jessica and Tom. With her retail experience, Jessica could easily find work at any number of stores in the local mall. Many of these jobs offered flexible hours that could accommodate childcare needs. For Tom, I found several openings in sales positions that were similar to his previous role, as well as a few entry-level management positions that might appeal to him. Armed with this information, I called my parents' house, hoping to speak with Jessica directly. My mother answered, her voice immediately cool and distant. "Jessica isn't available right now," she said, though I could hear my sister's voice in the background. "What do you want?" "I have some information that might help her and Tom find a place of their own," I explained. "I've found several affordable apartments in nice areas and some job leads that could help them qualify for a lease." My mother sighed heavily, as if my efforts were somehow an additional burden rather than an attempt to help. Fine, she said. You can email it to Jessica, but I don't think she's interested in looking at apartments right now. She's still hoping you'll come to your senses about sharing your house. Despite my mother's discouraging response, I sent the email to Jessica later that day. I tried to frame it as positively as possible, emphasizing the good features of each apartment and the potential for them to have a space that was truly their own again. I offered to help with the security deposit and first month's rent as a gift to make the transition easier. I even suggested that I could watch Amy and Lucas during apartment viewings or job interviews. Jessica responded several hours later with a single line, "We don't want to live in an apartment. The kids need a yard." I was stunned by the dismissal of my effort and the moving of goalposts. Initially, the issue had been that they needed a place to stay because living with my parents was too crowded. Now, apparently, only a house with a yard would do, despite the fact that they couldn't afford such a place without substantial help. I tried again this time, calling Jessica's cell phone directly. To my surprise, she answered. "Hi, Jess," I said, trying to keep my tone light and friendly despite the tension between us. "Did you get a chance to look at those apartments I sent? Some of them have really nice community playgrounds and pool areas that the kids would love." "We're not interested in apartments," Molly Jessica replied flatly. "The kids are used to having their own bedrooms and a backyard. It would be traumatic for them to downsize like that." I bit back a comment about the trauma they were currently experiencing living in my parents' crowded house, or the trauma they had gone through losing their original home due to their parents' financial irresponsibility. Instead, I tried reason again. "The reality is that right now you and Tom need to rebuild your financial stability," I said carefully. "That might mean making some temporary compromises. Once you're back on your feet, you can look for a house again." Or, Jessica countered, her voice taking on an edge, "We could just move into your house like Mom and Dad suggested. You have the space. You just don't want to share it." "Jess, my house is too small for 6 people." I repeated for what felt like the 100th time. "It's not about not wanting to share. It's about practical limitations. You, Tom, Amy and Lucas need your own space, not a cramped arrangement that would make everyone miserable." "Well, be fine," Jessica insisted. "The kids can share the second bedroom, and Tom and I can use the living room. It's only temporary until we save enough for our own place again." The conversation continued in circles with Jessica, dismissing every practical concern I raised and insisting that moving into my house was the only acceptable solution. When I asked how long temporary might be, she couldn't or wouldn't give me a time frame. When I pointed out that Tom would need to find full-time work before they could save for another house, she became defensive, claiming he was trying his best in a difficult job market. When I suggested that she could also work to contribute to their family finances, she acted as if I had suggested something outrageous and impossible. By the end of the call, it was clear that Jessica had no real interest in any solution that required effort or compromise on her part. She wanted the easy fix moving into my house, where she would likely replicate the same dependent relationship she had with our parents. I ended the call feeling frustrated, but also more certain than ever that I needed to stand firm in my refusal. A few days later, my parents organized what they called a family meeting to discuss the situation. The phrasing made it sound like a reasonable attempt at problem solving, but I knew better. This would be another ambush, another attempt to pressure me into compliance through collective guilt and manipulation. I considered not attending, but decided that absence would only make me look uncooperative and give them more ammunition. So I went to my parents' house at the designated time, once again, steeling myself for confrontation. The living room was arranged like some sort of intervention with chairs placed in a rough circle. My parents sat side by side on the couch, presenting a united front. Tom occupied my father's recliner, looking smugly confident. Jessica perched on the arm of his chair, her expression a practiced mix of hurt and hope. Even Amy and Lucas were present, though they were nominally occupied with toys in the corner of the room. I took the remaining seat, a hard dining chair that had been brought in for the occasion, symbolically uncomfortable and separate from the family unit. My father opened the meeting with a speech about family unity and support during difficult times. He referenced his own upbringing when aunts, uncles, and cousins would sometimes stay with his family during hard periods. He conveniently glossed over the fact that those situations had involved actual hardship, like job loss during economic downturns, not foreclosure, due to years of financial mismanagement. My mother followed with her own appeal, emphasizing how Jessica and the children were suffering in the current arrangement. The kids had no space to play. Jessica was depressed. Tom was stressed about finding better work. All of these problems, she implied, could be solved if only I would open my home to them. When it was Jessica's turn to speak, she went straight for emotional manipulation. "Amy, sweetie," she called to her daughter. "Come tell Aunt Molly what you told me yesterday." Amy, 5 years old and clearly coached, came over and looked up at me with wide eyes. "I told Mommy I want to live in your house because I love you," she recited. "And I promised Lucas we could have the blue bedroom because blue is his favorite color." The shameless use of a child to manipulate me was a new low even for my family. The fact that Jessica had specifically told her children about living in my house, down to which bedroom would be theirs, before I had agreed to any such arrangement, was breathtakingly presumptuous. I looked at Jessica, unable to hide my disgust at her tactics. "You shouldn't have promised the children something that isn't going to happen," I said quietly. "That's not fair to them or to me." "The only thing that's not fair," Tom interjected, sitting forward in the recliner, "is you having a whole house to yourself while a family of 4 is squeezed into one bedroom at your parents' house." I turned to him, my patience finally exhausted. "What's not fair is expecting me to solve a problem you and Jessica created through years of poor financial decisions. I worked hard for my house. I saved and sacrificed for years. I didn't overextend myself buying a place I couldn't afford. I didn't quit my job or take months off to find myself. I have been responsible with my finances and my life choices, and now you're trying to make me feel guilty for that." The room fell silent for a moment, my words hanging in the air. Then everyone started talking at once, voices raised in anger and accusation. I was called selfish, heartless, a bad sister, a bad aunt, a bad daughter. My financial responsibility was reframed as materialism and coldness. My desire for personal space and boundaries was characterized as selfishness and lack of family loyalty. The meeting devolved into chaos, with no resolution possible because there was never going to be a resolution where I gave in to their unreasonable demands. I left feeling drained and disheartened, but still certain that I was right to protect the life I had built for myself. What I didn't realize was that Jessica and Tom had already moved beyond guilt and manipulation to a more direct approach. They had decided that if I wouldn't invite them to live in my house, they would simply show up and make it impossible for me to turn them away. 3 days after the failed family meeting, I came home from work to find a U-Haul truck parked in my driveway. Jessica, Tom, and the children were standing on my front lawn, surrounded by boxes and suitcases. Tom was already unloading furniture from the truck, while Jessica directed the children to carry smaller items toward my front door. I sat in my car for a long moment, unable to believe what I was seeing. They hadn't called. They hadn't asked. They had simply shown up with all their belongings, clearly expecting to move in whether I agreed or not. With a deep breath, I got out of my car and approached them. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. Moving in, Jessica replied with a bright smile, as if this was all perfectly normal and expected. "Mom and Dad helped us pack this morning. We thought it would be a nice surprise." "A surprise?" I repeated, my voice rising, despite my effort to stay calm. "You can't just show up at someone's house with a moving truck and expect to move in." "Oh, come on, Molly," Tom said, setting down a box. "We've been talking about this for weeks. You knew it was happening eventually." "No, I didn't," I said firmly. "Because it's not happening. I never agreed to this. In fact, I've repeatedly said that this arrangement won't work." Jessica's face contorted with anger. So you're just going to leave us on the street with nowhere to go, with 2 young children? You have somewhere to go, I pointed out. You were living at Mom and Dad's this morning. You can go back there. We already gave up our room, Jessica countered, though I strongly suspected this was a lie. Mom is turning it back into her sewing room. The confrontation continued to escalate, with neighbors beginning to peek out of their windows at the commotion. Tom became increasingly aggressive, moving more furniture out of the truck, despite my explicit statements that they could not move in. Look, Molly, he said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. We're moving in today one way or another. You can either open the door and help, or we'll find our own way in. That statement, with its clear implication of forced entry, crossed a line. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the police. I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. You are trespassing on my property and threatening to break into my home. Jessica gasped dramatically. You're calling the police on your own family? How could you? I turned away from her theatrics and dialed 911. Yes, I said into the phone when the operator answered. I need assistance. There are people attempting to move into my home without my permission, and they're refusing to leave my property. As I spoke with the dispatcher providing my address and details of the situation, Tom and Jessica conferred in whispers. I could see the calculation in their eyes as they realized their plan had backfired. They had expected me to cave under pressure, to be too embarrassed by the public scene to refuse them entry. They hadn't expected me to stand my ground so firmly, much less to involve law enforcement. By the time I ended the call, Tom was already loading some items back into the truck. 2 police officers will be here shortly, I informed them. I suggest you start packing up the rest of your things. The officers arrived within 15 minutes, by which time Tom had grudgingly returned most items to the truck. I explained the situation calmly, showing my identification and mortgage papers to confirm my ownership of the property. The officers spoke with Jessica and Tom separately, then returned to me. Ma'am, they claim they had a verbal agreement to move in with you, one officer said. Is that accurate? Absolutely not, I replied firmly. I've repeatedly told them that they cannot move in. This was an ambush, an attempt to force me to take them in by creating a public spectacle. The officer nodded. In that case, we'll inform them that they need to leave the premises immediately. Do you want to press charges for trespassing? I considered it briefly, then shook my head. No, they're family, and there are children involved. I just want them to leave. The officers supervised as Tom and Jessica loaded the last of their belongings back into the truck. Jessica sobbed dramatically throughout, casting me wounded looks and making sure the officers and neighbors could hear her comments about cruel sisters and homeless children. Tom glared at me silently, his expression a mixture of anger and embarrassment at being thwarted. As they finally drove away, I stood on my front lawn, feeling simultaneously victorious and devastated. I had protected my home and my boundaries, but at what cost? The relationship with my sister, already strained, was now likely broken beyond repair. My parents would be furious when they learned what had happened. The wider family would hear a version of events that painted me as the villain who called the police on a struggling family with young children. But beneath the guilt and sadness was a surprising sense of empowerment. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had stood firm against my family's manipulations and unreasonable expectations. I had protected what was mine, what I had worked so hard to achieve. The guilt was there, carefully cultivated by years of family dynamics, but it no longer had the power to control my actions. I had finally broken free of the pattern of sacrifice and compliance that had defined my relationship with my family for as long as I could remember. And despite the pain of the moment, I knew I had done the right thing. In the aftermath of the U-Haul incident, as I came to think of it, my family relationships fell into a frosty silence. My parents, predictably, were furious when they heard I had called the police to prevent Jessica and her family from moving in. My mother left a scathing voicemail calling me heartless and declaring that she had raised a stranger, not a daughter. My father texted that he was deeply disappointed in my actions and needed time before he could speak to me again. Jessica blocked me on all social media platforms and instructed our extended family to do the same. The isolation was difficult, but also strangely liberating. Without the constant guilt trips and manipulation, I found myself enjoying my home, more fully settling into routines that suited my lifestyle and preferences without considering how they might be judged by my family. I threw myself into work, taking on additional projects and impressing my bosses with my dedication and creativity. My home office. The space that had been such a point of contention became a sanctuary where I produced some of my best design work. I started a small container garden on my patio, nurturing herbs and flowers with the same care I was now giving to my own emotional well-being. About a month after the confrontation, I received an email notification that caught my attention. The design agency I worked for was opening a new office in London and seeking internal candidates for several leadership positions. The email mentioned relocation assistance, a significant salary increase, and the opportunity to help shape the direction of the new branch. In the past, I might have dismissed such an opportunity immediately. Moving overseas would have seemed too selfish, too disruptive to family obligations. But now, with those obligations severed by my family's own actions, I allowed myself to consider the possibility. I discussed the opportunity with Sarah over coffee the following weekend. Unlike my family, she was immediately supportive. "You should absolutely apply," she insisted, her eyes bright with excitement for me. "It's perfect timing. A fresh start in a new city, a step up in your career." What could be better? "It's a huge move," I pointed out, though I could feel my own enthusiasm building. "I'd be leaving everything familiar behind." Sarah shrugged. "What's really holding you here right now?" "Your family isn't speaking to you. You're single. You could rent out your house rather than selling it, giving yourself a safety net if you ever wanted to return." She was right, of course. The timing was almost eerily perfect. At any other point in my life, such a move would have been complicated by family obligations and expectations. Now it felt like an escape hatch had appeared just when I needed it most. I submitted my application that evening, spending hours perfecting my portfolio and cover letter. The process moved quickly after that. A preliminary interview with HR, followed by a more in-depth discussion with the director who would be overseeing the London office. A final video call with several executives to discuss my vision for the creative team I would potentially lead. 2 weeks after applying, I received the offer. Senior Creative Director for the London branch, with a salary nearly double what I was currently making, plus relocation assistance, and a generous housing stipend for the first 6 months. It was an opportunity beyond anything I had imagined for myself at this stage in my career. I accepted immediately, a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations: visa applications, housing research, packing, and storage decisions. I decided to rent out my house rather than selling it, finding a property management company to handle the details in my absence. I arranged for most of my furniture to be stored, planning to start fresh in London with just a few cherished items accompanying me. Throughout these preparations, I heard nothing from my immediate family. Extended relatives occasionally reached out, having heard rumors of my impending move, but the silence from my parents and Jessica remained absolute. Part of me had hoped that the news of my departure might prompt some reconciliation attempt. But as my moving date approached with no contact, I realized I needed to be the one to reach out if I wanted any closure before leaving the country. I drafted a letter, taking care to express myself clearly and honestly, without either apologizing for protecting my boundaries or attacking them for their actions. It wasn't an easy balance to strike, but after several revisions, I was satisfied with the result. Dear Mom, Dad, Jessica, and Tom. As you may have heard by now, I have accepted a position with my company in London and will be relocating next month. Before I leave, I wanted to reach out one last time to explain my perspective on what has happened between us. I love all of you, and I have always valued family. But over the years, that love and value has seemed to flow in only one direction. I've been expected to continually sacrifice my own needs, goals, and boundaries to support Jessica and her family, while my achievements and struggles have been minimized or ignored. When I purchased my house, it represented years of hard work, sacrifice, and responsible financial management. It was to be my sanctuary and the base from which I could build the next phase of my life. The expectation that I should immediately turn it over to Jessica, Tom, and the children with no consideration for my needs or the practical limitations of the space was deeply hurtful and disrespectful. The attempt to force your way into my home without my consent crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. It demonstrated a complete lack of respect for me as an individual with the right to make decisions about my own property and life. While I regret that the situation escalated to the point where police involvement was necessary, I do not regret standing firm in my boundaries. I want you to know that my door will always be open for a relationship based on mutual respect and consideration. But I can no longer participate in a family dynamic where my value is measured by my willingness to sacrifice myself for others, especially when those others refuse to take responsibility for their own choices and circumstances. I wish you all well. I hope that Jessica and Tom find financial stability and a home that suits their family. I hope that Amy and Lucas grow up with a better understanding of personal responsibility and respect for others than has been demonstrated to them recently. And I hope that someday we might find a way to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. If you wish to contact me, my email address and phone number will remain the same after my move. With love, despite everything, Molly, I sent copies of the letter to each of them via both email and physical mail to ensure it was received. I didn't expect immediate responses, or perhaps any responses at all, but I felt lighter having expressed my feelings and perspective clearly. To my surprise, Jessica was the first to break the silence, sending a terse email 3 days later. I can't believe you're running away to another country instead of facing your family responsibilities. I hope you enjoy your selfish life in London while your niece and nephew grow up without you. The message confirmed that it made the right decision. There was no acknowledgement of her role in the conflict, no recognition of my perspective, just more guilt and manipulation. I didn't bother responding. My parents' response came a few days later, a joint email that was somewhat more measured, but still missing the point. "We're sorry things have escalated to this point," they wrote. "We only wanted what was best for the whole family. We hope you'll reconsider this drastic move and stay close to home where you belong. Family disagreements can be resolved with time and understanding." There was no apology for their actions, no recognition of my right to boundaries, just a vague appeal to family unity that ignored the very real problems that had led to our estrangement. Again, I chose not to respond, seeing no benefit in rehashing arguments that had gone nowhere before. As my departure date grew closer, the silence from my family deepened again. I had hoped for some gesture of reconciliation, perhaps a farewell dinner, or at least a phone call, but none came. It seemed they were sticking to their position that I was the one in the wrong, the one who needed to make amends by capitulating to their demands. The morning of my flight, I took one last walk through my empty house. The furniture was in storage, the walls bare of personal items, yet it still felt like mine in a way it never would have if I'd surrendered it to Jessica's family. I had stood my ground, protected what was mine, and now I was moving forward toward an exciting new chapter of my life. There was sadness in leaving under these circumstances, but also a profound sense of freedom and self-respect that I had never experienced before. As I locked the door for the last time, I silently thanked the house for being the catalyst for this necessary change in my life. Without the conflict over this space, I might have continued in the unhealthy family dynamic indefinitely, always giving, never receiving my own needs, perpetually secondary to everyone else's. The house had given me not just shelter, but the strength to finally break free. I handed the keys to the property manager, who would oversee the rental, got into my waiting Uber, and headed to the airport. London and a new life awaited. Whatever happened with my family in the future would be on my terms with my boundaries intact. For now, that was enough. 6 months later, I stood by the window of my London flat, watching the late afternoon sunlight play across the city skyline. The view was still novel enough to make me pause and appreciate it even after half a year of living here. My flat was smaller than my house in Chicago, but it suited me perfectly. 1 bedroom, a cozy living area, and a small second room that I had set up as a home office for the days when I worked remotely. London had embraced me in a way I hadn't expected. The city was vibrant and diverse, full of history, yet constantly evolving. My colleagues at the new office had welcomed me warmly, respecting my expertise and valuing my input in a way that felt refreshingly straightforward after years of family dynamics where my worth was always tied to what I could give or sacrifice. I had made friends, too, a small but solid circle of expatriates and locals who had invited me into their lives without expectation or manipulation. We met for Sunday brunches, explored obscure museums together, and helped each other navigate the occasional complexities of living in this ancient, wonderful city. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged somewhere without having to earn that belonging through constant sacrifice. My phone pinged with an email notification, drawing me away from my reflections. I picked it up, expecting a work message, or perhaps an invitation from friends for weekend plans. Instead, I saw an address I hadn't expected Jessica's. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Our last communication had been her bitter message accusing me of running away from family responsibilities. What could she possibly have to say now that would be worth reading? But curiosity won out, and I opened the email. "Hey Molly, I know it's been a while, and I know our last communications weren't great. I wouldn't blame you if you delete this without reading, but I hope you won't. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months. When you left, I was angry and hurt, and I said things I shouldn't have. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things, actually. After you moved, things got worse for us for a while. We stayed with Mom and Dad for another month, but the tension was unbearable. Dad was constantly stressed. Mom was taking it out on everyone, and Tom and I were fighting all the time. We realized we couldn't keep living like that. Tom finally got a full-time job. It's nothing fancy, just assistant manager at a retail store, but it's steady and has benefits. And the big change you'll probably be surprised to hear is that I got a job too. I'm working as an administrative assistant at a doctor's office. It's my first real office job, and I'm actually good at it. Who knew? With both of us working, we were able to rent a small apartment. It's nothing like our old house, just a basic 2-bedroom in a decent area, but it's ours, and we can afford it without help. The kids are adjusting well to the new neighborhood and school. Looking back, I'm embarrassed about how entitled I was about your house. You were right. It was your house, something you worked hard for, and we had no right to expect you to turn it over to us. The whole U-Haul incident was completely out of line. I let Mom and Dad convince me it was a good idea, but I should have known better. I'm truly sorry for that. I've been seeing a therapist the last few months. It's helping me understand a lot of patterns in my life, including how I've always expected others, especially you, to solve my problems. I've been working on taking more responsibility for my choices and their consequences. I miss you, Molly. The kids miss their aunt. I understand if you're not ready to forgive me yet or ever. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better and that I regret how things ended between us. Your sister, Jessica. P.S. Mom and Dad don't know I'm writing to you. They're still pretty hurt and angry, though. I think that's mostly pride at this point. Maybe someday they'll come around like I have. I read the email twice, then set the phone down and returned to the window, processing my emotions. Jessica's message was the last thing I had expected today, or any day. There was a part of me that wanted to dismiss it as another manipulation tactic, but something in the tone felt different. There was a humility and self-awareness that had never been present in our interactions before. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took the evening to reflect on what a relationship with my sister might look like now, with an ocean between us, and hopefully, new understanding on both sides. Could we build something healthier than what had existed before? Was I ready to try? The next morning, I drafted a careful response. Dear Jessica, thank you for your email. It meant a lot to hear from you, especially with the perspective and self-reflection you've gained. I'm genuinely happy to hear that you and Tom have found stable employment and a place of your own. That's a significant achievement, and you should be proud of yourselves. I'm also impressed and moved by your decision to seek therapy. That's a courageous step, and one that I can relate to. I began seeing a therapist myself shortly after arriving in London, working through my own issues around family dynamics boundaries, and the guilt that comes with prioritizing one's own needs. It's not easy work, but it's worthwhile. London has been good for me in many ways. The job is challenging and rewarding, and I've made friends who accept me as I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm thriving rather than just surviving. I miss you too, and the kids. I would love to see pictures of them if you'd like to share. Perhaps we could set up a video call sometime, if you're open to that. Small steps toward rebuilding trust and understanding between us. As for Mom and Dad, I understand their position. The hurt goes both ways, and it may take time for those wounds to heal if they ever do. For now, I'm content to focus on the connection you've reached out to establish. Take care of yourself. Molly. Over the next few weeks, Jessica and I exchanged occasional emails, cautiously getting to know each other again, as the adults we had become, rather than the roles we had played in our family drama. She sent pictures of Amy and Lucas, now in kindergarten and preschool respectively, growing and changing in the way children do so quickly at those ages. I shared glimpses of my life in London, my work projects, the places I was exploring. We eventually did have that video call, awkward at first, but warming as Amy and Lucas joined in, excited to see the aunt they remembered more fondly than recent events might have suggested. Jessica looked different somehow, more grounded and present, less the perpetual victim waiting for rescue. Our relationship was different now, tentative but potentially stronger for having been broken and mindfully reconstructed. We were more careful with each other, more respectful of boundaries, more appreciative of the effort it took to maintain connection across distance and past hurt. It wasn't the automatic obligation-based family bond of before, but something more intentional and perhaps more meaningful. My parents remained silent, though Jessica occasionally mentioned them in our conversations. They were adjusting to an empty nest again, finding new routines and interests now that the chaos of hosting Jessica's family had ended. Jessica thought they missed me, but were too proud to reach out, still convinced they had been right to prioritize her needs over my boundaries. I accepted this information without pushing for reconciliation. If and when they were ready to acknowledge my perspective and respect my autonomy, I would be open to hearing from them. Until then, I was at peace with the distance. As I stood by my window once more, watching a gentle London rain blur the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The house in Chicago, now occupied by a young couple who sent occasional updates through the property manager, had been both the breaking point and the catalyst for change in my life. By forcing me to stand firm in my boundaries, it had set me free from patterns of obligation and guilt that might otherwise have defined my entire life. I had lost something in the process, the automatic acceptance of a family that had always taken my presence and support for granted. But I had gained so much more self-respect, authentic relationships, a career that challenged and fulfilled me, and a life that was truly my own, shaped by my choices rather than others' expectations. Sometimes, family isn't about blood ties or shared history. Sometimes, it's about finding the people who see you clearly, respect your boundaries, and value what you bring to their lives without expecting you to diminish yourself for their benefit. It found that kind of family here in London among friends who had chosen me as I had chosen them. And perhaps with time and continued growth on all sides, my biological family would find their way back to me on healthier terms. Jessica's unexpected reaching out suggested it was possible. Until then, I would continue building this life I had claimed for myself. One choice, one boundary, one day at a time. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows in a soothing rhythm. I made a cup of tea, an English habit I'd happily adopted, and settled into the comfortable chair I'd placed specifically to enjoy this view. Tomorrow would bring work challenges, social connections, perhaps another email from Jessica, or silence from my parents. Whatever came, I was ready to face it on my own terms with the strength and clarity I'd found through standing up for myself when it mattered most. Sometimes, to find your true family, you have to be brave enough to walk away from the people you always thought were family. Sometimes, the greatest act of love, both for yourself and for those who have taken you for granted, is to say no, to set boundaries, and to show through your actions, rather than just your words, what you will and will not accept in your life. In doing so, you create the space for healthier relationships to either grow or reveal themselves as impossible, and either outcome is valuable in its own way. As I sipped my tea and watched the London rain, I felt a deep sense of peace with all of it, the losses, the gains, the journey still unfolding. My story wasn't over, but this chapter, the one that had begun with buying a house and ended with finding my voice, had taught me more than I could have imagined about family boundaries and the courage to create a life that truly belongs to you. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who didn't respect your space or independence? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful destinations.